Alright, class, sit down and shut up. Welcome to Cryptozoology 101. With the second season of Nomads in full swing, I thought now would be a good time to talk about this guy. No, not that guy. This fellow, the Mongolian Death Worm, or the Olgoi Korkoi, translated to large intestine worm, initially introduced as the Tsuchinoko, which is a completely different yokai in Japanese mythology that we'll discuss on another day. However, it is easy to see how the residents of Byakuja village confused this creature with the Tsuchinoko. The Mongolian Death Worm is a cryptid or unidentified mysterious animal that is said to be indigenous to the Gobi Desert. For those unaware, the Gobi Desert is the sixth largest desert in the world, located between southern Mongolia and northern China. For context, the Gobi Desert is about 590 miles from Ikaho in Gunma Prefecture, the part of Japan that Byakuja village is based on. Now, how a giant worm made its way from the Gobi Desert into a Japanese volcano is beyond me. And keep in mind, I am an anime only when it comes to Dandadan, so if it was explained, please do not spoil it in the comments below. Tales of the Mongolian Death Worm spread among Mongolian nomadic groups for centuries. However, the first reference of the worm in the West was in 1926 by American explorer Roy Chapman Andrews. Fun fact, it is rumored that he is the inspiration for Indiana Jones. However, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas have not confirmed that. After exploring the Gobi Desert and Mongolia, Roy Chapman Andrews wrote a book called On the Trail of the Ancient Man, where he retold the secondhand accounts he heard during his travel. One of the secondhand accounts was from Mongolian Prime Minister Damdin Bazar. He describes the worm as such. It is shaped like a sausage, about 2 feet long, has no head nor legs, and it is so poisonous that merely to touch it means instant death. It lives in the most desolate parts of the Gobi Desert. So the initial description of the worm makes it much smaller than the worm we see in Dandadan.
That's not the worm. That's his tongue.
Local legends say Mongolian death worms can spray venom and attack using an electric-based attack. Don't ask me how, I have no idea. I'm assuming it's similar to the mechanisms that allow an eel to produce electricity, but I'm not a biologist, so don't ask me. We see these types of attacks used by the worm in Dandadan. Unlike the legends of the Mongolian Death Worm, this version uses a psychic wave to manipulate its prey into necking itself in Minecraft. When introduced, Turbo Granny describes this creature as a kuragari. Translated, kuragari can mean darkness or gloom, and it's often used to reference being surrounded by darkness. So, using this context, kuragari means to dwell in darkness, such as the underground den we first encounter the worm. Mongolian death worms are typically depicted as creatures that can burrow underground and then come up after rain, much like earthworms, and live near sources of water, which would explain why we see this one living near a Japanese hot spring. Iconic pieces of media have been inspired by Mongolian death worms, the most obvious examples being the Tremor films with the Graboid, the Dune franchise with the sandworms of planet Arrakis. Of course, we can't talk about a cryptid without there being a campy sci-fi movie. And oh look, it's sitting at a 3.4 out of 10 stars. Somehow, still better than Snow White. The most famous example in the realm of video games is probably the death worms in Ark Survival Evolved. The game uses the scientific name Korkoi Arrakis, a nice little nod to Dune. The most recent example, and the whole reason we're even here talking about this right now, is the Tsuchinoko in Dandadan. Alright, that's enough talk about video games and anime. Back in the real world, there were a handful of expeditions to find any evidence of the Mongolian death worm, including Roy Chapman Andrews' initial visit to the Gobi Desert. Ivan Makarel, and I mispronounced that, I am so sorry, a Czech automotive engineer and cryptozoologist, brought a group on 2 Dune-inspired investigations in 1990 and 1992, and another investigation in 2004. This man actually created a motor-driven thumper like the ones used in the Dune series, along with buried explosive charges. Dude was literally just blowing up the desert and making as much noise as possible to try and attract these worms. It's insane. Actual mad lad. The 2004 investigation, however, primarily used a small aircraft to fly over and recon the area. Needless to say, there was no evidence recovered from any of these trips. However, Ivan put a positive spin on things in a 2007 interview with the Prague Post, stating, "Mainly, I do expeditions for the love of adventure. Naturally, I like to make a discovery, but it's very difficult to find something new. But still, it's exciting to go through the countryside with machetes, to drive through the desert, meeting people, to talk about mysteries. Ivan, you were a man after my own heart, an adventurer to the end. Rest in peace." Richard Freeman, an author and cryptozoologist for the Center of 14 Zoology, a cryptid research group based out of England, led a team to find the Mongolian Death Worm in 2005. Richard believed that Ivan's approach would scare away the worms and not draw them to him. Gee, I wonder why.
Naturally.
Freeman's team would use two different approaches for their search. First, they would have flyers with an image of the worm created and offered a reward to any locals that could provide information or samples of the creature. Second, the team wanted to recreate the environmental conditions that the worms were rumored to enjoy by blocking off water to local streams. Both of these plans did not pan out the way that they wanted to, and so the team had to settle for using small traps instead. Though no evidence was found, Freeman's team heard stories of the Mongolian death worms that extended from 1930 to 2004. Freeman noticed that all the stories described a creature that matched the description of the local Tartar sand boa. Ironically enough, the Tartar boa isn't even venomous, so where the idea of instant death and venom came from, I do not understand. It is a desert, so maybe people were just hallucinating and dying from thirst, who knows. But all this makes me wonder if the creator of Dandadan used the Tartar sand boa as the inspiration behind the confusion of the Tsuchinoko and the Mongolian death worm. Would be pretty clever. The most recent expedition that I could find was conducted in 2009 by David Ferrier, a journalist from New Zealand. Much like the previous expedition, David Ferrier came back empty-handed in terms of physical evidence, but collected local stories from people who claimed to see the worm themselves. Interestingly, David noticed that sightings of the worm peaked in the 1950s. That really sparked my interest. So I kind of took a look at what was going on in the area during that time. And my personal theory is the construction of the Trans-Mongolian Railway. Now, the Trans-Mongolian Railway began construction in 1937, and it basically extends through Mongolia into Russia and China. Obviously, with World War II going on, the construction kind of took a halt. So construction through the portion of the Gobi Desert didn't start until 1953. Now, I believe, and there's no evidence to support this or prove this, is just my personal belief. This is just a theory.
A game theory.
I believe that tired workers from the Soviet 505th Penal Unit confuse the Tartar sand boa with the worm after hearing stories or warnings from possible limited interactions with some nomadic group. It is possible that those workers also shared their stories with locals who already believed in the legend of the worm, and then they spread those stories through their travels as well. But again, this is just a theory. There's no evidence to prove this. This would all have to have been done through word of mouth. There's no physical evidence that I could find that would support this theory. But a bunny can dream. While tales of venomous electric sandworms are so exciting to believe in, so far, from every expedition that has been conducted, there has been no physical evidence to prove the worm's existence. Regardless, That didn't stop the legend of the Mongolian Death Worm from inspiring people to create iconic series, iconic creatures in pop culture. And though there hasn't been any evidence to prove its existence, this little rabbit likes to believe that there is a slim chance that somewhere out there is a worm hiding in the sands of the Gobi Desert, or just maybe under a volcano in a Japanese hot spring village. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate it. My name is Usagi Decipher. I'm just a sleepy bunny that likes to talk about lore, history, cryptids, mysteries. If you like this video, make sure you leave a comment talking about your favorite cryptids or things that you would like me to talk about in the future. I hope that I've earned your subscription today.
Let's up those numbers!
And until next time, I will talk to you guys later. Stay classy. Bye-bye.